Hi, I'm the Sandworm from Dune, and today I'm ranking every Pixar movie. Pixar is a very special film studio to me and many other people around my age. Many people, including myself, grew up with these movies and were often some of our first experiences with the art form known as cinema. They were the studio we came to for fun and creative concepts like what if toys were alive, what if a rat could cook, and what if robots fell in love. Although I do have nostalgia for the studio and I love quite a few of their films, I am also a tad cynical towards them. Some of their films, especially recently, are just underwhelming, and over the years I've grown to be more of a Studio Ghibli guy. So yeah, I have some takes in this video that may or may not upset some people. So I want you to keep in mind, these are just my dumb opinions, you don't have to agree with them. Also, despite my criticisms, I wish the best for the studio and everyone working there. Yeah, Cars 2 is stupid. Big surprise. I'm already not a fan of the first Cars movie, but this movie somehow manages to be worse in every single way. It's unfunny, it's childish, and it's boring. I don't like the character of Tow Mater. I'm all for redneck stereotypes and whatnot, but Tow Mater is not a funny one. The story is dumb, the characters are dumb, you're dumb, I'm dumb. Yeah, I'm not talking about this movie anymore. You all know why it's bad, I'm not gonna sit here and just beat a dead horse. 2 out of 10, next movie. The Good Dinosaur is very bad. It's one of those movies where when it's over, you let out a sigh and think to yourself, finally. To be fair, this movie had a very messy production with directors dropping out of the project and a whole lot of other behind-the-scenes shenanigans. This movie is just boring. I don't give a shit about the characters or the story. Why does the human character act like a dog? That's fucking weird. The cartoony dinosaur designs look stupid. The comedy is painfully childish and unfunny. The movie does have some good elements. The photorealistic backgrounds of the movie are genuinely beautiful. I like the scene where Arlo explains what happened to his parents with the little stick figures. I like the part where that one dinosaur talks about drowning another dinosaur in its own blood. That was pretty cool, I guess.
I want to stab you to death, then play around with your blood.
I like the part where Arlo says,
"Alright, you clockers,"
because the way he says it makes it sound like a slur.
"Alright, you clockers."
Yeah, that's about all I've got for this movie. Besides the colorful scenery, this film is just a bland and childish mess. Sorry, I'm not a fan. Lightyear is also very bad. When I first watched the movie in 2022, I was pretty lenient towards it. However, now that I'm a little older, I've grown to really dislike this movie. There's just an aura of disgusting corporate cynicism in this movie. I just don't really get the point of this movie, to be honest. Like, this movie is supposed to be the precursor to the original Toy Story. Lightyear was apparently Andy's favorite film, and it influenced him to get the Buzz Lightyear toy for his birthday. The film is kinda meta because it's a movie within another movie. I'm sorry, but we really didn't need to see this. We didn't need to see a Toy Story spin-off film. This isn't Luigi's Mansion. On top of that, the movie is just fucking lame. The characters are bland and so is the writing. I could give a more in-depth explanation as to why I don't like this movie, but similarly to Cars 2, I just don't want to. Even the people who like this movie understand why the film has such a negative reception. Sorry, I'm not a fan of this one either. Sorry to all the redheads watching this video, but Brave is not good. Similarly to The Good Dinosaur, this movie had a very messy production behind it, and, well, it's easy to tell. The film is very derivative of previous Disney movies, making for a predictable and forgettable experience. This movie is just very bland and filled with unlikable characters. I don't like the character of Merida, she is irritating. The comedy is unfunny and childish. The movie has a twist that doesn't work at all. There are some good things about this movie, like the animation looks beautiful. I like the dad character, he was pretty enjoyable. I like the film's many inclusions of Scottish culture and Scottish folklore. It's also pretty cool that this was the first Pixar movie with a female main character and a female director. Until she got fired from the project, but let's not get into that. But overall, this movie is very messy and underwhelming. If you like this movie, that's cool, it just doesn't work for me personally. Some people might get mad at me for this placement, but I don't give a flying fuck into a rolling donut about Cars. I know this movie means a lot to some people. Listen, if you have fond memories of it, that's cool. However, to me, a movie revolving around talking cars is a broken concept at its core. I'm okay with there being unanswered questions in a fantasy movie. I am a big fan of Studio Ghibli after all. But the questions this movie leaves unanswered makes the universe of this movie feel very flimsy. Do the car doors work, and do they lead to their brains? There are scenes where the cars drink and eat stuff, so do they have a digestive system? There are bathrooms in this universe, so how do the cars, How do the cars reproduce? When the cars crash, is that like the equivalent of gore? When cars make fun of other automobiles, is that bigotry? And even if you ignore these questions, the movie itself is just kinda dumb, unfunny, and bland. I don't like the characters in this movie, I don't like Tomater, and I don't like Chick Hicks. The only character I liked was Fillmore, but that's probably only because he was voiced by George Carlin.
Cursing, cussing, swearing, and all I could think of was shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits.
The character progression of Lightning McQueen is pretty alright, and the racing scenes are pretty great, but that's about it. Sorry, not my thing. Speaking of movies that aren't my thing, Elemental. There's obviously nothing wrong with injecting your own life experiences into your art. In fact, that's something I fully support. However, the art still has to be good. The characters, the dialogue, the world building, the comedy, the emotional moments, and the soundtrack were all pretty weak. I remember the marketing for this movie also being really bad. The marketing team really tried to turn the Claude character into a meme for some reason. Yeah, it was very cringe. I don't know who was in charge for marketing this movie, but go to sleep. The film tries to do this whole Romeo and Juliet type love story with the two main characters, but they barely have any chemistry together. The movie also tries to use these elements as a race allegory, but it doesn't really work well either. The film is also just very cliche and predictable. Honestly, that's the part that bugs me the most. You can tell that passion and creativity went into this movie, but it's wasted on this painfully generic story. This movie bombed at the box office at the time of its release, but it eventually found an audience overseas. I'm glad this movie has its fans and its defenders. It's just not really my thing. Monsters University is not very good. This is the prequel to Monsters, Inc., and it tries so hard to work. However, it's like watching someone try to blow up a balloon that had a hole in the side of it. The film has some good stuff. The comedy is fine, it isn't hilarious or anything, it's just fine. The film has a nice soundtrack and some great animation. The film also has a pretty nice and refreshing message about just because you can't succeed in one area doesn't mean you can't succeed at all. You don't really see messages like that often, so that's one original aspect to a very unoriginal film. Yeah, much of the film is very generic, dull, and predictable. The side characters are pretty bland and forgettable. The frat boy characters are some of the most basic bully characters ever. Also, the whole Mike Wazowski isn't scary thing feels kinda forced. I know it's a pretty crucial plot detail in order to get the film's message across, but it could have been done in a more seamless way. Speaking of plot details that don't work, why does the dragon lady just suddenly decide that she hates Mike and Sully? That also felt pretty forced. If you like this film, that's cool, it just doesn't work for me. Finding Dory, more like finding boring. Whenever I watched Finding Nemo for the first time, I remember thinking to myself, damn, us humans really treat fish like shit, don't we? Whenever I watched Finding Dory for the first time, I remember thinking to myself, damn, I'm craving seafood right now. Yeah, as you can probably tell by now, I'm not a big fan of these Pixar sequels, besides the Toy Story movies, obviously. There is one Pixar sequel that I do like, but most of these, not my thing. This movie has many of the same problems as Monsters University. It's a generic, dull, and predictable movie. I don't like the character of Dory in this film and in the original Finding Nemo. Yeah, I probably just pissed off some millennial Disney stans, but whatever. Even as a kid, I never really found her that funny. Honestly, I even think she can be a little irritating in this movie at times. Okay, before the Dory fanbase kills me, I'll touch on some of the positives this movie has. As usual for Pixar, the animation looks beautiful. The side characters are okay. The comedy is okay. Yeah, those aren't huge positives, but I'm trying, okay? Well, one thing I do really like about this film is the way it looks at disabilities and shows that disabilities don't define the people who have them. I think that's pretty sweet. But overall, yeah, I just don't care for this one. If you like it, that's fine, it's just not my thing. Cars 3 is easily the best in the franchise, and I still didn't care for it. I like how the film looks at growing old, what it means to age, and passing the torch to a new generation. I also like how the film completely ditches Radiator Springs, all the dumb spy stuff, and Tow Mater. Yeah, get the fuck out of here, bozo. However, the film is still very lackluster and dull. The film does quite a bit of repeating of the first film, which... Just like the previous movies, the comedy in this movie is unfunny. The villain character is bland and not very memorable. It is easy to tell that the people working on the movie are huge fans of the Cars franchise, but I'm not a fan of the Cars franchise, so maybe that's why this movie didn't really speak to me. It's not an awful film, and I'm glad it has its fans, but it's not an experience I enjoyed very much. Turning Red is a very difficult movie for me to talk about. I say that because my thoughts on this movie can basically be summed up in 4 words. It's not for me. I'm glad that many people were able to relate to this movie. It's a film about what it's like growing up with overprotective parents and all the wackiness that comes from going through puberty as a young girl. The film was very clearly inspired by the director's own experiences growing up as a Chinese Canadian and how overwhelming that often was. Now, the stuff I just listed is all fine and dandy. Why did I write that 1930s ass sound in? However, the things that really drag this movie down for me are the characters and the comedy. The characters and the comedy in this film are both very cringe. I'm sorry, I find most of the characters in this movie to be annoying, and the comedy is just not my sense of humor at all. Listen, if you related to this movie and found comfort in it, that's totally cool. Same applies to the rest of the movies I rated negatively so far. I've always tried my best to avoid the toxic side of online film discourse, and I always love it when people are able to express differing opinions on movies in a civil manner. If you see Turning Red as the best Pixar movie, even though I may disagree with you, I think that's a valid opinion to have. Simultaneously, if you think The Grand Budapest Hotel is the worst Wes Anderson movie, even though I may disagree with you, I think that's a valid opinion to have. With that being said, this is still my video, so I have to be honest with myself here. This movie is just not my thing, but hey, don't let me stop you from enjoying what you enjoy. Onward is fine. It's not bad. It's not good either. I kinda wish this movie had more of an emotional impact on me, considering it's a movie all about the relationship between 2 brothers. I have brothers, this movie should have been awesome to me, but it was just decent. With that said, the ending is very sweet and fantastic. It's definitely the strongest part of the movie. The rest of the film isn't anything bad, but isn't anything mind-blowing either. For whatever reason, I just wasn't fully engrossed in the fantasy world this movie sets up. The comedy is pretty hit or miss. Sometimes it's pretty charming, other times it isn't. The pixie biker characters were not funny at all. They were kinda irritating, honestly. The animation is beautiful, of course, as with most of the Pixar movies from this era. Oh yeah, and who can forget, this film has the first gay Pixar character. The character has a very brief line about having a girlfriend, which can be edited out for the countries that are led by homophobic pussies. Yay. Yeah, this isn't a very memorable or remarkable movie, but it's fine for what it is. Luca is also an okay movie. The film is very reminiscent of the whimsical slice-of-life movies from Hayao Miyazaki like Kiki's Delivery Service, My Neighbor Totoro, and Porco Rosso, though the film doesn't quite live up to that same Miyazaki standard because it wasn't made by Miyazaki. That being said, I really like the simplicity and low stakes of the movie. I know some people found the characters in this movie to be annoying, but I didn't. The relationship between the three main characters is pretty charming. I especially like the character of Marco, he's just great. Obviously, the animation in this movie looks absolutely spectacular, though am I the only one who doesn't like the fish character designs? I think they look kinda weird. Also, the film has a great message about being true to yourself despite what others may think. However, like I stated earlier, the film doesn't quite have the same polish as a Miyazaki movie. The underwater fish world this movie creates didn't quite grab me in the way I would have hoped for. The climax of the film feels pretty lacking. Lastly, the emotional moments weren't very effective on me, though maybe I'm just heartless. Overall, it's far from the best in Pixar's catalog, but it's also far from the worst. It's just a decent little movie, it's fine. Inside Out 2 is cute. The film has beautiful animation, a charming sense of humor, and it's definitely imaginative at times. However, I can't help but think this is another Pixar sequel that didn't need to be made. Sure, the film explores themes of mental health and the pressures of growing up in a thoughtful way, but so did the first Inside Out. The new emotion characters are fine, there's the extremist, the gooner, the insecurity, the French. I feel like I got their names wrong. The film certainly adds onto some elements of the first Inside Out, but too much of the writing and plot beats are kept the same for the film to truly feel like a noteworthy experience. If you connected with this film, that's totally cool. I personally think it's just okay. A Bug's Life is pretty average. Although the comedy and characters are not nearly as strong as Toy Story, they still work relatively well. The circus bug characters in particular have some pretty funny moments. The film has some fun action and a pretty great climax. My favorite part about the movie, though, is the villain. Hopper is such a fantastic villain, he has such an intimidating presence in this movie. I'm not a big fan of the whole liar revealed shtick in this movie. It's not bad, but it's the same thing you've seen a million times before. If I'm going to talk about this movie, I should probably address the elephant in the room. After Toy Story became a huge success, Pixar already had plans to make their second movie about bugs. However, when Jeffrey Katzenberg left Pixar to start up DreamWorks, he wanted to take the bug idea with him, but Pixar didn't budge. This began a race between Pixar and DreamWorks to get their CGI bug movie out first. DreamWorks had Ants and Pixar had A Bug's Life. Personally, I see A Bug's Life as the better movie. I'm not a big fan of Ants, though it's not an awful movie, it's just fucking weird.
You know, I was gonna let you become part of my most erotic fantasies, but now you can just forget that.
Thank you, Mr. Woody Allen, for saying that line. Okay, back on topic. A Bug's Life is a charming little movie, but it's not the most memorable compared to some of Pixar's other films. Besides the Toy Story sequels, Incredibles 2 is the Pixar sequel that I actually like. I was expecting to not like this movie on rewatch, but no, I still kinda like this one. Yeah, it's not nearly as good as the original, but it's still solid and enjoyable. The animation is beautiful, and I love the 50s aesthetic. The jazzy score is fantastic. The action scenes are excellent. However, I have mixed feelings on the characterization, character development, and new characters. Frozone has some really memorable moments in this film. Violet has some nice and charming character development. Jack-Jack is surprisingly funny. I usually dislike haha it's funny because it's cute characters in movies, but the scenes with Jack-Jack had some really well executed moments of slapstick comedy. Also, this might be the Breaking Bad bias within me, but I really enjoyed the characters of Winston and Rick.
This whole thing could have been avoided. Shut the fuck up.
That being said, some of the other characters were just off. I really like the character of Bob, but he can be a douche in this movie sometimes, which feels uncharacteristic for him. I also like the character of Dash, but he can sometimes be a bit annoying in this film. The new superhero characters are pretty forgettable and have some lackluster character designs. Also, the twist villain is predictable and dumb as hell. One last flaw that I have with this movie, the comedy is just okay. It's not bad, but besides the scenes with Jack, the comedy never got anything more than just a slight smile or a slight exhale out the nose from me. Yeah, I know I'm being a bit harsh to a movie I'm giving a 7 out of 10 to. Retrospectively, my feelings on this movie are pretty similar to my feelings on Tarzan. Both have their fair share of flaws, but I still had a great time watching them. Am I being too generous? I don't know. I like this movie anyways. Is that the fucking fire alarm? Although Toy Story 4 is easily the worst in the franchise, unless you count Lightyear, it's still a solid and sweet farewell. Just like The Incredibles 2, I was not expecting to like this film on rewatch, but nope. Bo Peep is really great in this film. Duke Kaboom feels like Keanu Reeves doing a parody of himself, and I love it. The Key and Peele stuffed animals provide some funny comic relief. Forky is pretty funny as well. Even the villain works surprisingly well, but of course there's this movie's focus, Woody. His character progression is a delight to watch, especially considering me and so many other people have basically grown up with this character. The animation is incredibly impressive, the action scenes are fun, the comedic moments are charming, and the emotional moments are touching. However, this movie is far from perfect. Buzz Lightyear and all the other classic characters feel kinda rushed and tossed aside. Sure, they're not this movie's focus, but I still would have liked to see more from them. The scene with the toys controlling the RV was pretty stupid, but overall, this is a great movie and I'd recommend checking it out if you're interested. Sure, this film didn't really need to be made, but I'm personally glad that it was. Inside Out is pretty great. I don't love it as much as many other people do, but it is still a good movie. I have this movie on DVD and okay, I need to get something off my chest really quick. I hate how Disney does their DVDs and Blu-rays. What's the reason for having 5 commercials play before you can even access the DVD's menu? It's a DVD. Well, you can use Disney Fast Play to— why are you calling it that? It's the skip button. Okay, well anyways, Inside Out. It's a movie full of whimsy, imagination, and magic around every corner. The score has some beautifully melancholic piano melodies. The emotional moments work really well. Joy's character growth throughout the movie is, well, a joy to watch. Also, this movie gets bonus points for having Kyle MacLachlan as the dad character. This movie touches on depression in a way that's both mature and easy to understand for kids. The film was inspired by Pete's doctor's own experiences with his 11-year-old daughter trying to understand what was going on inside her head. It's a concept that's explored with such care and passion that it feels almost impossible to not get at least somewhat wrapped into. However, this movie is not without its faults. I'm sorry, the humor in this movie is childish and safe, which is a combination that just isn't my thing. The majority of comedy in this movie is not funny to me. But hey, comedy isn't this movie's focus, so it doesn't completely ruin the film. Also, there are some weird plot holes and conveniences that I caught from time to time. The one that especially stood out to me was Joy and Sadness trying to wake up Riley to get the train moving. Like, you can just wait. Be patient. But overall, this is still a great movie that I'd recommend checking out. It may not be one of my favorites, but it's still good. Soul, or as I like to call it, How to Disappear Completely. Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey both give really solid performances in this film. I love the character growth of Joe and 22 throughout the film. The animation is beautifully textured and has some vibrant use of color. The scenes in the Soul world in particular have some striking visuals. The jazzy music by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is excellent. That sentence is kind of funny now that I think about it. If you're a huge Pixar fan, the same duo that composed the soundtrack to Soul made this really whimsical album called The Downward Spiral. Listen to it with your kids. This movie touches on some pretty existential themes, which is pretty cool for a kid's film. It also touches on those themes in a way that doesn't feel too scary or daunting to kids. I will say, I don't think the writing for this movie is perfect. This movie doesn't really explain why some people are allowed to be in both both the real world and the soul world. This movie also pussies out on what could have been a great bittersweet ending, which is unfortunate. But overall, this is a very nice and thoughtful movie. Finding Nemo was one of my favorite Pixar movies as a kid, and yeah, it still holds up. All the characters are memorable and lovable. I like Nemo, Marlin, Crush, Bruce, the fish tank characters, the Willem Dafoe fish.
Let Neptune strike ye dead, Winslow!
The writing is great, and I love how episodic it feels. The animation is colorful and still holds up to this day. The comedy is funny, and the dramatic moments work really well. This movie also has some pretty dark and intense moments for a kid's film. Yeah, insert the SpongeBob roller coaster meme, but you know it's true, don't lie. My only main issue is the thing I mentioned earlier when I talked about Finding Dory. To be fair, even though I don't find Dory that funny, she does have some charming moments in this movie. Yeah, this is an amazing Pixar film that you should watch if you haven't already. Looking back on it, the 2010s were very hit or miss for Pixar, but they started the decade out pretty strong with Toy Story 3. The new characters are great, and the old characters are given more depth. Lotso is such a hateable villain, but that's what makes him such a good character. The comedy is funny, the whole prison element is exciting and tense, the ending is very bittersweet. Also, this movie has surprisingly quite a few dark moments. When I was a kid, I remember some of these scenes actually creeping me out. However, this movie has a couple of flaws. I don't like how they changed Bullseye into a dog even though he's a horse. I know it's a nitpick, but come on, it's weird. I also don't like how the characters are so resistant to trust Woody at first, and it felt pretty unnatural character-wise. But overall, this movie is amazing. Although I do think the themes about aging and moving on were done much better in some other Pixar movies, this is still a really solid film that I'd recommend watching if you haven't already.
In the case of Toy Story, the third one is just magnificent. It's one of the best movies I've ever seen. And if you've seen the other two, then it's devastating.
Is it a cartoon?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Coco is fantastic. The characters are well written and enjoyable. Miguel in particular is a really great main character, and his journey throughout the film is enticing. The animation is obviously beautiful, detailed, and incredibly impressive. I love the incorporation of Mexican culture through urban legends, food, language, art, and of course music. The team behind this movie really did their research, which ultimately makes the film feel like a love letter to both Mexican culture and music. Speaking of which, the music in this movie is just phenomenal. I mean, it's a Pixar movie about music, so of course it's good. Also, I didn't realize until now that the artist lady from the rehearsal scene was Frida Kahlo. Pretty neat touch. Oh yeah, and that ending is just fantastic. Heartwarming and emotionally touching in the best of ways. I guess I did have some problems with the writing, like the comedy is pretty safe and bland. It's not bad, it's just whatever. I also found the story to stick a little too close to the Pixar adventure film formula. I didn't notice it at first until the dog, who isn't supposed to be dead by the way, started to accompany Miguel on his journey. First of all, Second of all, the dog is just a character that exists because quirky animal sidekick. Not a fan. And I know some people criticize this film for being derivative of Book of Life. I haven't seen Book of Life in a long time, but from what I can remember, the films only really share the common premise. Coco goes in a very different direction from Book of Life by the end. Overall, although not perfect, this is an amazing movie. I'd recommend watching it if you haven't already. Monsters, Inc. is another childhood classic. This movie, of course, has the classic trio of John Goodman, Steve Buscemi, and Billy Crystal because Jeff Bridges would have been too obvious. John Goodman is lovable as Sully. Billy Crystal is funny as Mike. I love the friendship between Mike and Sully and the way it's constantly tested. Steve Buscemi is diabolical as Randall. I also love the relationship between Sully and Boo. The way Sully becomes sort of a father figure for Boo is really charming. The animation is amazing and the character designs are especially fantastic. The writing is brilliant, especially with the world building. The comedy is hilarious and the emotional moments work surprisingly well. well. The jazzy music is great. The climax of this film is so exhilarating and it's just so much fun. I guess if I did have one issue, it would be the romance between Mike and Celia never felt like it had any actual chemistry. But overall, I love this movie and it holds a special place in my heart. It's also cool that Mike and Sully showed up at the Oscars that year. I didn't know they were real.
Looks like it's you and me, Raggedy Ann. Call me Barbie! Okay, fine. Looks like it's you and me, Barbie. I'm going fucking crazy.
Toy Story is just a classic. For the first ever fully computer-generated movie, the animation is still pretty good. I mean, it can look janky sometimes, but it has a charm. Tom Hanks is great as Woody, and Tim Allen is great as Buzz. I also really like the character arcs that both characters have. The comedy is hilarious. I also just think the core concept is a really creative one. A movie about toys coming to life when people aren't looking, and a toy getting jealous of another toy. That's a really interesting idea for a movie, and it's explored really well. I remember I watched this movie a lot growing up, and I think my family had a VHS copy at one point, but I can't quite remember. There is one thing to nitpick about this movie, which is how Buzz reacts to the world around him. Like, if he genuinely believes that he isn't a toy, then why does he freeze when a person sees him? But overall, it's a childhood classic, so I have a huge soft spot for it. I also like how the carpet in Sid's house looks like the carpet in The Shining. You've always been the caretaker, Mr. Andy. Toy Story 2 is my favorite Toy Story film. The film was originally going to be a direct-to-DVD sequel along with the other terrible Disney sequels of that time, but early in production, the team knew that they had something good enough for a theatrical release. I love the comedy and the scenes with Buzz. I love the dramatic moments and the scenes with Woody, especially with Jesse's backstory. The writing is brilliant, and the themes concerning purpose and mortality are still pretty powerful for a kid's film. All the new characters that this movie introduces are memorable and delightful. The animation is also great and a step up from the first. Yeah, it still looks janky in some areas, but I think it's aged pretty well. I really don't have much else to say, it's just a really great movie. I'd honestly go as far as to call it one of the greatest movie sequels because it builds onto the foundation that the original film set up in a brilliant way. I guess if I were to nitpick one aspect of this movie, it would be the closing credits. I don't know why many 3D animated kids movies from the early 2000s ended in a fake blooper reel, but they were never funny and they were kind of annoying, to be honest. Once again, that's a huge nitpick, and this movie would still be a 9 out of 10 for me without it. I just wanted to mention that because, I don't know, why not? Overall, this is an incredible sequel to an already incredible film. Up is such a charming movie. First of all, the first 15 minutes of the movie, one of the best montages in film history. Incredible visual storytelling and powerful drama. Although I've never cried watching it, yeah, I'm heartless, but it's impossible to not get at least a little choked up by it. Now, many people make the argument that the opening is the best part of the movie and the rest is just okay. I agree with the first part, but I think the rest of the movie is still pretty fantastic. Due to this being a mainstream Pixar film, I think many people forget how kinda weird and surreal this movie is. I mean, it's not Spirited Away levels of weirdness, but it's still a very creative movie. The character of Carl is so easy to empathize with and love. The way the concept of aging is explored through the character of Carl is so thoughtful and sweet. The dogs provide some really funny comedic relief. The villain, although not the greatest, adds some really good tension to the story. This film might have my favorite Pixar score, and it really adds to the emotions of each scene. The animation is colorful, and of course the dramatic moments really tug at the heartstrings and give this movie the special touch that it needs. My only complaint is, although I do like the character of Russell, I never found him as funny as the movie clearly wanted him to be. This is my main problem with pretty much every Pete Docter Pixar movie. The child characters he writes are great overall, but it's clear that he finds them way funnier than they actually are. Still an incredible movie that I'd highly recommend watching if you haven't already. Ratatouille is a masterpiece. This movie has such a rich and sophisticated atmosphere. Patton Oswalt is endearing as Remy, who leads an inspiring tale about why it's important to follow your dreams. Lou Romano is funny as Linguini. Janine Garofalo is fantastic as Colette. The animation is beautiful, colorful, and vibrant. The character designs are brilliant and memorable. The writing is smart, the dialogue is engaging, and the comedic moments are great as well. However, my favorite part about this movie, and basically the reason why I think it's a masterpiece, is the critic. At first I was concerned that this was going to be an extremely shallow criticism is bad because it hurts people's feelings message, but then it hit me with one of the most intelligent and thought-provoking monologues I think I've ever heard in a film. Without further ado, spoilers. If you don't want this movie spoiled, skip to this point in the video, there's your warning. Yeah, the critic's ending monologue was so beautifully, for lack of a better word, accurate. I love how it both deconstructs criticism and shows why it's important. It also reminds some of the people in the audience that even though critics can be harsh sometimes, they're just people. This movie captures all those things in a very meaningful way, and it really struck a chord with me. Also, I just realized that the critic character was played by Peter O'Toole from Lawrence of Arabia. That just makes me love this character even more. Anyways, this movie is a masterpiece. Highly recommend watching it if you haven't already. The Incredibles is my second or first favorite superhero film of all time. I can't decide if I like this or Spider-Verse more. Why? Because it feels like a love letter to the superhero genre. It takes place in the 60s, the golden age of superheroes in comic books. It explores the positives and negatives of having superpowers. It explores the dangers of envy and celebrity worship. And of course, the movie revolving around a superhero going through a midlife crisis wishing things would go back to the good old days is just brilliant. It was Pixar's first movie with human protagonists and the first to earn a PG rating. The comedy is very funny and quotable, the animation is expressive, and I love the comic book-esque character designs. The emotional moments hit hard, especially with how it handles the family drama. The characters are all memorable and fun. The action is exhilarating, especially in that last third. Brad Bird truly made something special here. Side note, I really like and appreciate that one moment in the commentary track when Brad says,
animation is not a genre. And people keep saying, the animation genre. It's not a genre. A Western is a genre. Animation is an art form, and it can do any genre. You know, it can do a detective film, a cowboy film, a horror film, an R-rated film, or a kid's fairy tale. But it doesn't do one thing. And next time I hear, what's it like working in the animation genre? I'm gonna punch that person.
He's 100% right. Anyways, this movie's a blast and it will forever hold a special place in my heart. Yep, WallE is my favorite Pixar movie. In terms of visuals, this is one of the most beautiful 3D animated movies that I've ever seen. The film creates a post-apocalyptic world that is as bleak as it is gorgeous. The romance between WallE and Eve is so adorable, the music is gorgeous, the sound design is incredible, and the minimal dialogue really makes this movie stand out from the rest of Pixar's catalog. The first half is easily the best part of the movie. It manages to have an atmosphere that is both eerily dystopian and whimsical at the same time. Now, many people are split on the second half of this movie, but I personally really like it. Sure, it's not as good as the first half, but the second half is what really completes this film. I like how both halves of this movie touch on a different message. The first half conveys an environmental message in a visceral way, and the second half shows the negative aspects of consumerism. In that sense, this film definitely pulls some inspirations from the films of Stanley Kubrick, mainly 2001: A Space Odyssey, although I do prefer the more poetically haunting future that Kubrick conveys in 2001, I still adore the bleak yet hopeful future conveyed in WallE. Overall, this movie's a masterpiece. Highly recommend watching this film if you haven't already. So yeah, that was my Pixar ranking. Despite the studio's missteps, I really like Pixar. I hadn't seen many of these movies since I was a kid, so when I revisited them for this video, I was shocked by how well they held up. I think that's mostly partly in due to the fact that most Pixar movies target both adults and kids rather than just kids. Like, there are some movies that I liked as a kid, but when I rewatched them as an adult, I realized, oh, this kinda sucks. However, my favorite Pixar movies are just as good to me now as they were when I was a kid. Next video, I'm talking about frogs. Subscribe or something like that. Bye bye.